Why don't you just do meeting is being recorded? Okay, got it. So I'm going to call this meeting to order, and I'm going to thank everybody who's on the call. And I wanted to be able to start out by saying there's a lot of things going on in the Michigan legislature right now. So this is kind of an exciting time. I guess it's an exciting time from the standpoint it keeps us definitely on our toes. So wanted to start out though, getting started anyway with our speaker, and I really appreciate that Ben Gardner is here with us today. Ben originally contacted me about this Michigan Voting Rights Act legislation because he saw that people of faith could have some role in supporting this. At the same time, there's other voting rights legislation that's coming up that Ben may be able to share with you as well. I'm going to give you a little background on Ben, and then we'll get started. Prior to joining the All Voting is Local campaign, Ben spent nearly a decade working as an organizer, field director, and a campaign manager on several congressional and issue advocacy campaigns in Michigan, Wisconsin, Indiana, and New York. He worked for Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign, presidential campaign, as a deputy organizing director, and he brings a passion for community organizing, social justice, and democracy. And Ben is a proud graduate of Michigan State University, so let's hear it from Michigan State. And he holds a bachelor's degree in comparative cultures and politics from Michigan State University's James Madison College of Public Affairs. So with no further ado, I'm welcoming Ben to give us an overview and some insights about voting rights, particularly related to the Michigan Voting Rights Act bill.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Randy. And good. So can you hear me?
I think maybe I will go out and come back in again while you all take things. I'll give that a try, okay?
All right. Can everybody hear me?
Sign out.
Okay. Wonderful. Good morning. First, thank you for having me. Second, I just want to apologize. I am fighting through a cold, but I think I'm on the good side of it. But if you have difficulty understanding me, please forgive me. I will be doing my best to enunciate as I battle that cold. It's that time of year, as I think we know. But also the Michigan State reference, I appreciate that, Randy. Although I will admit I am not the best Spartan today. I will be taking the day off from watching the rivalry. So you can join me in that if you're a Spartan, or you can judge me. I won't. I won't judge you either way. But that's where my head is at on this particular Michigan State day. We're just taking the year off, as I like to say. But it's good to be with you. I have a slide deck that I'd like to use. So I'm going to try and share my screen here. Usually works pretty easily. Can everybody see this? I see some head nods. Wonderful. Okay, great. So, as Randy said, I initially, reached back out to Randy because of some movement with the Voting Rights Act, and I think our goals are still achievable for the purposes that I reached out, which essentially revolve around a belief that we can really activate and mobilize communities of faith to talk about some of the new voting rights and new protections that the legislature is passing and hoping to pass between now and the next election. There's a number of updates that I'll go through here regarding the timing and the implementation of the Voting Rights Act, but I think that in large part there's the opportunities to work with communities of faith to get out the vote and educate voters for 2024 still exist. There's just kind of some changes to the timeline since we first talked. So I'd like to dive into some of the background and the need for the Voting Rights Act, but first I'll just give a very short overview of what
Mute.
some of you may already know,
And let's
which
put this
is
here.
the big focus here
Audio
in
settings.
2023 has been Proposal 2 implementation. The legislature has tried to move as fast as possible without inconveniencing clerks to pass laws to implement what the voters approved last November, which was Proposal 2. So those changes include early voting. That's probably the biggest change to our elections. Beginning in 2024, state and federal elections in Michigan will be required to provide 9 days of early voting for local residents. Now that can be implemented in various ways, and I'm going to ask if someone I think someone's off mute. If you don't mind muting yourself, that would be really great. Thank you. But the 9 days of early voting is a significant change for clerks. It obviously requires more money. We tried to work with the legislature to approve efficient funding. So that was a mixed bag, to be honest.
Randy.
There was, oh, sorry. Let me see if I can. Danny, do you have the ability to mute? Or, okay, great. Thank you. But the funding did not come in quite at the levels that we wanted or that the Secretary of State wanted. However, for the purposes of Prop 2 implementation for the next year, clerks did receive sufficient funding. So that was a minor victory, even though we'd like to see more funding for elections overall. Now, you're probably wondering, what about early voting for, my local elections? Right now, most communities are not doing early voting for this year, but some are doing early voting as a pilot. Oakland County, in particular, is trying to pilot some programs. And the early voting agreements, they can work in three ways. The municipality can choose to go at it alone, essentially, and provide the 9 days of early voting themselves. But keep in mind, again, this is only required for state and federal elections, so it will really kick in next year. The second option is they can partner with other municipalities in the county and offer early voting sites and consolidate some resources that way and save some money. And then a third option, which is what Oakland County is doing right now as a pilot program, they can coordinate with the county and work together as a county. So that's kind of the breakdown of the three options of how early voting will be implemented. And the benefit, as a lot of people have been wanting for a while, the benefit is the voters can actually put their ballot through a tabulator and have the confidence that it was tabulated and counted right there in the moment. Some voters who have voted absentee in the past have expressed a desire for that. So early voting will the big change from early voting is, before you would go in, you fill out an absentee ballot, you drop it off in a drop box. Now you'll actually be able to see it go through a tabulator, and 9 days minimum are required. Other requirements from Proposal 2, just real briefly, drop boxes are now required, one for every 15,000 residents in Michigan. Many communities, most communities, I should say, do have a drop box, but many don't necessarily operate within the spirit of the law. They might have, for instance, a population of 35,000, but they have two drop boxes in very close proximity to each other at City Hall. So the communities that really do it right are communities like Lansing, Detroit, where they make use of the community centers, fire stations, other public buildings. We're hoping that, with the new requirements for drop boxes, that we'll start to see a little bit more equitable distribution throughout the communities. And that legislation has been passed, so we should see some movement in terms of new drop boxes being installed throughout the states, throughout the communities, and throughout the state. The third big change is prepaid postage. Essentially, just remove any economic barriers or disincentives to people who may wish to cast an absentee ballot. The state will provide prepaid postage on absentee ballot and absentee ballot applications. And then finally, there's this creation of a permanent absentee list, which is a bit of a shift from the existing permanent absentee voter application list. So that's what the legislature has really been focusing a lot of its time on. But there's a lot of other important bills, and I want to go into some of those through this presentation. But I'll step back and give some context for the Voting Rights Act and why it's necessary here in Michigan. So I'm sure we have some close political observers here, supporters of civil rights, who know a little bit about Shelby County versus Holder. So I won't go too deep into it, but I'll give some kind of overview of it, because I do think it really is important understanding the context for why we need a Michigan Voting Rights Act and why we need to continue to pass pro-voter policies in states like Michigan and really all over the country. So get a quick sip of tea first, and then we'll dive in. So the 15th Amendment, way back in 1870, technically coming off of the Civil War, it did prohibit discrimination against any voter on the basis of race. So in theory, great. Our leaders stepped up, they passed this good law, but we all know about Jim Crow laws. Jim Crow laws immediately followed in predominantly southern states as a backlash to the 15th Amendment and some of the progress that was being made at the time when it came to equality and opportunities for people of color. So these Jim Crow laws were unfortunately very, very effective, and I think we all know some examples, poll taxes, etc. But they were very effective at suppressing the Black vote, just throughout the South, throughout the country. And it wasn't until 1965 that we were actually able to pass a federal Voting Rights Act. It really is a landmark piece of legislation, because between 1870 and 1965, you really saw whether it was income inequality and wealth gaps, voting participation gaps, whether pick any economic indicator or civic participation indicator you want. It was really just a big problem throughout the country, and it was clear as day that people of color were being discriminated against and denied equal opportunity in the United States and in our most important, arguably our most important, civic activity, which is voting. So the Federal Voting Rights Act really was a successful piece of legislation. Every aspect of it mattered, but I want to speak specifically to the pre-clearance section, which was section 4. So pre-clearance, what was required following 1965 is all those communities and states that passed Jim Crow laws were now required to submit election plans showing that people were protected from discrimination and that they weren't, that their communities were not going to continue the same discriminatory practices that they had for decades, going back to the 1870 and before. So the pre-clearance section really was kind of the heart of the Voting Rights Act. If you read anything about the Voting Rights Act, or you listen to any experts about the Voting Rights Act, that was the true heart of the bill. So we saw, through from 1965 through 2012, 2013, we saw that a lot of those gaps that I spoke to really started to narrow. Not by no means did we solve racism in America, right? By no means did we solve inequality, and by no means was access to the ballot completely equitable for all Americans. But it was we had made huge progress, and those protections were critical to continue to make more progress, as well as guarding against bad actors who may want to pass laws, may want to return to the days of Jim Crow. So what happened in 2013 is really significant. The Supreme Court struck down, it's a ruling, Shelby County in Texas versus Holder. Shelby County sued the United States, and the Supreme Court ruled in their favor and struck down Section 4, meaning communities were no longer required to follow the pre-clearance laws and could immediately begin passing discriminatory voting laws, including discriminatory voting ID laws, consolidating and closing polling locations, and a whole lot more. And so you can imagine what happened was exactly that. Texas, Kentucky, a lot of these states really started passing some horrible legislation, and also closing the polling locations in a way that really disenfranchised Black voters. I think perhaps the most brazen example is, I think, Kentucky had 320, this is in 2016, Kentucky had 320 polling locations in predominantly Black communities. They closed almost all of those down to one. So I really urge you to, if you're interested, just read up about the aftermath of Shelby versus Holder, because it really was a disastrous decision from the Supreme Court, and unfortunately, we're still feeling the effects of it today. So I linked an NAACP report in this. I can send that out to Randy after this. There's several other organizations like the Brennan Center and others that have done excellent reports on this, but I really do recommend taking some time. So that brings us to the Michigan Voting Rights Act. Why do we need it? Well, we need it because for a number of reasons. One, Michigan right now is in the process of declaring itself a very pro-democracy state. We've passed some of these pro-democracy laws, pro-voter laws. We're implementing them. We're making progress. Most importantly, we're also responding to the will of the voters, saying that this is, we like these laws. We like Proposal 2. We like automatic voter registration going back to 2018 with Proposal 3. So we want to continue to build on that momentum. But, on the negative side, since 2021 alone, 42 restricted voting laws have been passed across 21 states. So, you might think it's been almost a decade since Shelby versus Holder. Is some of the anti-democracy momentum slowing down? Unfortunately, it's not. Bad actors are still out there trying to restrict access to the ballot. This year alone, in 2023, dozens of states have been considering anti-voter legislation. Now in Michigan, we're fortunate. We do have the pro-democracy trifecta, and All Voting is Local. We're a nonpartisan organization, so we don't endorse any candidates. However, we are really happy to see the leaders in place, the governor, the legislature. They overall they support expanding access to the ballot, protecting access to the ballot for all, and so that's a good thing. But the threat still remains. There is a group in the legislature that, if they had power, would pass voting restrictive laws, and they could very well come into power again very soon. So we want to pass the Voting Rights Act to preempt whatever attempts they might make at suppressing the vote. There's also just a void here. Unfortunately, Congress has not passed legislation to restore key protections of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. We've seen some votes come up in the House. We've seen the House take some action, but it always dies in the Senate. So this is an opportunity for states like Michigan to take the lead and take proactive steps. And then lastly, and this is a really important point, the federal VRA does not account for some really prevalent language minorities in Michigan. Due to how census data is collected and how protected classes are defined, Arabic speakers are not really protected at all. And so I'll get back to that in just a moment. But some context for the Michigan Voting Rights Act, just to understand, is this possible? Are there other states thinking about this? There are several other states that are considering this. So California, Oregon, Washington, Virginia, New York, and Connecticut have already passed theirs. California was way ahead of the curve back in 2002. But you can see, the rest of the states, it's a post-Shelby, it's kind of a reaction to the Shelby ruling, right? And we're seeing this year, Maryland, New Jersey, and Michigan are among the states that are trying to pass these, pass their own version of a Voting Rights Act. Now, not every state is the same, but they're similar. And so I'll go into kind of what the exact provisions are in the Michigan Voting Rights Act in just a second. But I wanted to also touch on the status of this legislation. So it was introduced to some fanfare back in the summer. Senator Darren Camilleri and several others introduced a package of legislation, and it got some good press and some fanfare. But unfortunately, because of all the other priorities, it hasn't really moved as fast as we'd like it to. So the reason why I just want to touch on the status real briefly is when I first reached out to Randy, I thought with some optimism, this might pass, and we could talk about implementing it and talking to our friends and neighbors about what this means and why they should know about it, and kind of taking the voter education route. But unfortunately, we are kind of in a standstill. So we'll go back into that a little bit more. But what would it accomplish here in Michigan? First and foremost, it would protect voters from racially discriminatory voting policies. You think about any local election administrators who might come into power, who may want to cancel out or minimize the voting power of Black and brown voters. This Voting Rights Act would protect against any bad actors who might come into power as a local clerk. It also makes it easier for voters experiencing discrimination to fight back in court. That's a big one. The court, the disincentives to take legal action are many. This would reduce those barriers, hopefully eliminate them. Thirdly, it expands protections for voters who don't speak English as their primary language. That's a big priority in Michigan. They're like I said, the Arabic speaking populations are not protected under the VRA, but there's also a lot more that we could be doing to service other populations who speak Mandarin. Hispanic voters are prevalent in many parts of the state, so Spanish language services would be incredibly helpful. There's a significant population here in Southeast Michigan that speaks Bengali. So there's more that we can do to translate election materials, to provide bilingual poll workers. That's a program that we supported last year through some sub-grants at All Voting is Local. If we were able to pass the Michigan Voting Rights Act, those bilingual poll workers would be provided by the state, would be required in some of these precincts. So very, very important. And then next, this would really establish some important research infrastructure to help local governments and stakeholders identify discriminatory voting policies before they're actually enacted. So I mentioned pre-clearance in section 4 of Shelby. That would be brought back in the state of Michigan and would require communities to submit election plans and show the state that they're not adopting any discriminatory policies, whether it be insufficient polling locations or insufficient drop boxes, insufficient early voting hours, etc. A big part of the research aspect of the Voting Rights Act is the creation of a statewide database. We actually do not have that right now. So under this policy, under this legislation, the state would partner with a university. It could be Wayne State, could be Michigan, could be Michigan State, could be anybody. And so that's still in the works in terms of who the state would partner with, but essentially that institution would create the statewide database of demographics, voting rules, and allow us to really inform a lot of the voter education and policy work that's done in the state based off this new and up-to-date demographic data. And then finally, it establishes a voter education fund that would educate the public and train election workers, which is always a good thing, frankly. There's a lot of policy that gets passed sometimes that says all the right things, but doesn't have a mechanism for informing the public. This does, and that's a really important part. So the bills themselves, I'll just kind of gloss over. It's just helpful to know the numbers. 401, 402, 403, and 404 in the Senate. These all cover what I just went over in the last two slides. But as you're thinking about reaching out to legislators and advocating for this, it's good to have these numbers in the back of your head. Senate Bill 401, 402, 403, and 404. I don't want to duplicate anything I've already said. So except I will touch on Senate Bill 404, which is to say curbside voting right now is not required at all times in every polling location. The Michigan VRA would require curbside voting. And it's really intended for the people who need it, people who are disabled or have a temporary condition or injury that makes it harder to get around. Curbside voting will be provided under the law within 200 feet of any polling location. So I do want to dive in a little bit more to what makes Michigan unique. So I've talked about Arabic. It's the third most common language in Michigan, and yet it's not actually protected under the Federal Voting Rights Act. So that's really important. The other languages, Spanish, Bangla, Mandarin. There's pockets of the state where we have a lot of Mandarin speakers who do not speak English as their first language. It would really be a big deal to provide services for these voters and require the state and local election officials to actually translate election materials. Right now, there is some good work that's done. We partner with organizations in Southeast Michigan and in West Michigan, but it's not being done at the scale that we need it to and that the state can do it at. So that's why it's really important to pass the language access provisions of the Voting Rights Act. Another thing that makes Michigan unique and really makes it important to pass this is that what makes Michigan great, it also makes it a little bit susceptible in some ways. We have a very highly decentralized election system. You might read about some states in the news like Arizona or Georgia they have like a dozen clerks maybe in those states. Georgia a little bit more. Um, Other states might have a system where their county clerks run most of the elections and do most of the work around elections. Michigan and Wisconsin are very different than every other state. We have over 1,500 municipal clerks, city and township clerks, um, to go with the 83 county clerks. But it's those municipal clerks, the city and township clerks, who do most of the election administration. Um, they're really they're doing the bulk of the work. So the obvious concern is what happens if a bad faith actor gets into one of those positions, that they could potentially do great harm. I don't want to be alarmist in saying that, because I think in many ways the decentralized system makes Michigan more secure and more transparent than ever, but it does, if someone were to say, I want to sabotage the system, I want to become an election official, that opportunity does exist. The VRA can protect against their power to cause harm. Then the other thing I do want to address here is the Wayne County canvasser debacle. I don't know how many people read about that or followed it, but in 2020, we had a close call. The election was over. President Biden won. The it it was decided, right? But the county board of canvassers in Wayne County, which, like every county, is comprised of 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. The 2 Republicans on the board initially refused to certify the election results, and they initially refused to certify only the results in Detroit. So if you know Wayne County at all, there's Detroit and there's the rest of Wayne County. And it was pretty clear what was happening. Unfortunately, President Trump at the time was personally calling these county canvassers, who are sworn to do a ministerial duty of checking the math and making sure that all votes are counted, right? And then certifying the results, but not changing votes or not casting out votes. That's not their job. But President Trump is calling them, saying, you have to throw the election to me. You have to do this. You have to do that. You can't certify this election. And so, fortunately, the coalition, the pro-democracy coalition, rallied in strength in numbers and really just kind of put their foot down through public comment at the time, which was virtual because of COVID, and basically said, hell no, you will not disrupt our elections. You will not disenfranchise the voters of Detroit. We see what you're doing, and we're not going to let you do it. Unfortunately, better angels prevailed, and the 2 Republicans did certify the results. But it exposed sort of a potential weakness in the system, where if people wanted to disrupt the county canvassing boards, they could. That I just point out that episode to show that that really illustrated a need to take some proactive steps to guard against bad faith actors. And then finally, I'll mention in 2021, there were 39 bills as a backlash to the results of 2020. 39 bills introduced alone in 2021 to restrict voting rights or harm election administration, or otherwise demonstrate just a lack of knowledge of existing election law and procedure. So, like I said earlier, if people that are hostile to these pro-voting laws that have been passed, if they come into power in the legislature, they could very well try and pass discriminatory voting laws. But if we pass the Voting Rights Act, it can guard against that. So I'm coming to the last part of this, but we're getting away. We're going to get away from the Voting Rights Act as we wind down. So I thought maybe I could pause and just see if there's any questions on any of what I just covered before we get to the last bit here. Does anyone have any questions?
I see Dave, his hand up there.
Good morning. Sorry, I'm flittering all over the place there on my screen. My question is, you mentioned that there were 300 polling places in Kentucky before the law was passed, or they changed the election laws to make it only one. How does anyone in their right mind justify that?
That's a good question, and my personal answer for you is shamelessness. But yeah, I don't have a good answer other than that. It's tough. I mean, there are people out there. I'll say this: there are people. As I watch the Michigan House elections or Senate elections and ethics committees, there are people that think, well, some of this is redundant, or could we be, is there a way that we can be a little bit more efficient with the taxpayer's dollar? There are people, I think, of good faith who sometimes will look at, well, how much money can we save from closing some polling locations? And to be fair to clerks, that often is a very real consideration and need. Especially as if they're seeing low turnout, anemic turnout, even in primaries. Clerks will tell you, hey, it's not logical to have the same number of polling locations in November, or that we have in November, available for anemic turnout in August. Which I'm somewhat sympathetic to, although I still believe in my heart, equal access should be an equal access. And so, yeah, I'm trying to talk around like what do good faith people say, but when it comes to that example and some of what happened in Kentucky, Texas, Tennessee, Alabama, I don't think those people were acting in good faith. I think they saw an opportunity to to make it harder for Black people and people of color to vote. So yeah. Yvonne or Nick?
Yes.
Oh, Nick, do you want to go first?
Oh, okay. Ben, I think you were hinting at this, but in terms of the the decentralization of our system, there's good and bad, obviously. The danger you pointed out for Wayne County was real. But on the other hand, if you centralize it, then that means you could have two bad actors on the state board of canvassers and screw up the entire state. So I personally think the decentralized system benefits outweigh its dangers, but it does speak to the fact that the interested groups like yours, and I'm involved with the Michigan Democratic Party's voter protection program, need to constantly be vigilant and watch who gets appointed to those boards. It's not the system that's problematic, it's who's appointed to the positions in that system. And it makes it tougher in a decentralized state, but it has its benefits too, because it's harder to take over the whole state, if you will.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, as there were attacks made on by the big lie, quote unquote, folks out there, the fact that we were decentralized gave us much more, made it much more defensible to be able to argue against that, and gave us lots of different arguments. So, I mean, I tend to think the decentralized system benefits outweigh the burdens. but no system is perfect, and we need to just keep being vigilant on that. We are at
Yeah.
the state party. We monitor the appointment of canvassers and try to make sure that we don't get somebody in there.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I totally agree too that the net benefit is, outweighs the potential risk or negative. And even recently, you mentioned the canvassers. There were election deniers. We were tracking this in the nonpartisan space. Um, there were election deniers being nominated by the county parties in some counties to the board of canvassers because there's upcoming vacancies as of October 31st for the next 4-year term. That the appointments have mostly now all been made, or some are being finalized this week. But yeah, there's still bad faith actors out there. I will say just real quickly that I think one other concern outside of the county canvassers with the decentralized system, and this is not to say that we want to change the decentralized system, because I think it's about that benefit, but in the case where maybe a rogue mayor becomes mayor of, I don't know, East Point or Warren, and decides, that they don't want to represent the changing demographics of the city. That's sort of where the concern also lies, where with protecting against potential rogue elected officials who try and pass policies. But I see Yvonne, do you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I had a question about the Senate Bill 401 through 404, the voting rights bills. Have they been voted out of committee, or are they still
So
on committee?
they've received some hearings, but there have been changes. So it's been kicked around, and really where we're at with the last slide will cover this and the bills that I'm about to address. But really where we're at is we want to contact the Senate Elections and Ethics Committee chair, who, to be very clear, I'll state this again before we wrap up, is as strong an ally on these bills as you can ask for, Senator Moss, Jeremy Moss, and just let them know that, hey, this is a priority. We know there's a lot to go on, a lot that needs to be considered before the end of session, but we really hope that it'll make the Voting Rights Act and these other bills a priority, because he and Senator Brinks, the Senate Majority Leader, probably have the most influence right now over what gets a floor vote. So yeah, the answer to your question about it is a little complicated because there have been some substitutes and different packages, but my understanding of it right now is it needs to go back through the whole process, essentially, those 4 bills. So but hopefully it can move quickly, if the conditions are in place. So I do want to wrap up shortly here to leave more time for questions, but it shouldn't take too long to go over this, although it is a very important part. So and it's exciting. There's some good news here. I feel like some of this has been dark and bleak, so I've got some good news that we can end on. First, House Bill 4568. So initially, part of the Voting Rights Act was a bill to repeal the ban on paid transportation and rides to the polls. So in the past, many years ago, you'd see robust Souls to the Polls programs, churches with vans, buses. There's absolutely nothing wrong or nefarious about that, but certain anti-democracy people, thought there was. And Michigan is one of the only states actually that has a ban on transportation to the polls. It's really ludicrous, but fortunately, this bill seeks to repeal that, and there is strong momentum behind it. House Bill 4568. That would also open up potentially, opportunity for rideshare programs like Lyft, Uber, to come into the state and say, hey, election day, if you need a ride to the polls or you need a ride to your early voting site, we'll give you a free ride code. That would be legal. And that's done in some states, and there's just nothing wrong with that, right? It's just it increases access. It helps people that don't have access to transportation. It helps people with disabilities, helps the elderly. So hopefully that will pass. The other one, actually, the next two are sort of in tandem, and there's very good news to report on these. So House Bill 4569, pre-registration for 16-year-olds. A big goal of our organization and a work group that we co-lead with Campus Vote Project is to pass pre-registration in 2023 so that in 2024, 16-year-olds can pre-register to vote. It's just a common sense piece of legislation. It would require voter registration materials for every 16-year-old in every public high school in Michigan. And there's really just no downside to this. It allows people to engage with the electoral process at an earlier age. It reduces barriers to registration. And it builds on what the voters have already said that they support, which is, 2018, overwhelmingly, Michigan voters supported Proposal 3, which included automatic voter registration. So pre-registration in many ways is just an expansion of that. The tandem bill with this is 4983, a secure automatic voter registration expansion. So this would expand the government departments that offer automatic voter registration to Medicaid recipients, the Department of Corrections, and tribal communities. It's believed that this would help close the gap of Michigan's 400,000 eligible but non-registered voters, more than any other thing. This would cover the largest number of that 400,000 population. So it's a really exciting piece of legislation. It received both of these received a vote in the House and are awaiting action in the Senate. They passed the House, and we got good news as of like 6 p.m. last night, which is that Wednesday, the Senate Elections and Ethics Committee will be taking up these bills and hopefully passing them out of committee. So that's very exciting. I will wrap up in just a few moments here on some asks that we have for you, just as individuals, for how you can make your voices heard in support of those bills. But that was a very, very important step to get that hearing, and we're very pleased that Senator Moss and his colleagues appear to be moving to take action on this. And then lastly, Senate Bill 594. This is actually kind of a new one, but Senator Moss introduced this just a few days ago. This will receive a hearing. It's unclear how fast it will move, but it just provides upgrades to the online voter registration system. Right now, it doesn't function as well as it needs to for people that are trying to register on their phone. So we think about young people, they do everything on their phone, right? So this would really provide some much needed upgrades to make that online voter registration system functional for people, and specifically, young people, but every voter as well. So I'm going to skip this slide because I think we've covered it. I gave context already for what the voters feel, but just generally speaking, the voters weighed in time and time again and said that they're supportive of pro-democracy ballot initiatives and pro-democracy legislation. So I only bring that up to say, we have the wind at our backs here. The people have been clear and demanding pro-democracy policies from their leaders. So it's up to them to now, continue to implement it, continue this momentum, continue to protect our elections. So what can you do? The two people that need to hear from us the most are two allies. I want to be very clear with that. So as you think about writing to Senator Moss and Senator Brinks, we just really ask that you keep in mind that, to our knowledge, they support everything we've talked about here. So we're not asking people to email them and browbeat them or anything. Quite the opposite. We just, it would make a big difference if folks could just send words of encouragement, thanking them for working on these pieces of legislation, and asking them to give a floor vote on the Senate to these bills before the end of session. We're coming up on the end of session, probably 3 weeks from now. So time is really of the essence. I've heard November 9th. I've heard November 7th, November 6th. So, yeah.
I don't mean to interrupt, but you
No,
do
no, please.
understand that bills carry forward from one session to the next in the same term.
Yes.
So,
Yes, they do. It's just, we'd love to be able to get
Sure.
this before 2024. Especially because there's some other factors at play when it comes to
immediate effect.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. I could Nick's a close observer of all this immediate effect and some other factors where I unfortunately I do think there's a strategy at play from people who will be voting no to slow play this, but they don't have the power. So these bills, if they pass, will make a big difference. When it comes to 2024 implementation, unfortunately, language access won't be required until 2025, but the sooner we pass it, the better. Other parts of the Voting Rights Act, might not actually be implemented until 2025. But again, we want to try and pass these as soon as we can to get that ball rolling. Because some of these provisions will take some time. We think about the
Right.
Database Institute. Yeah.
Can I just ask you one question on the
Sure.
16-year-old pre-registration?
Absolutely.
How would that also work at the automatic registration for driver's licenses and state IDs? Part of the problem we have right now, I think you can pre-register at what, 17 and a half or something like that, or
Yeah.
earlier date. But kids generally get their driver's license when they're 16. It's a 4-year license, which means they don't have to go back until they're 20.
Exactly.
What we had proposed to Secretary Benson, I was on the advisory committee on the implementation of the 2018 proposal, is that she just take them, hold them as automatic, hold them in abeyance, and then they fall directly onto the qualified voter file on their 18th birthday, or on their 18th birthday, assuming they met the other qualification. Which I think the legislature held her back on that, or something held her back on that. I'm not sure I know what, but if we could get, when you get your driver's license, pre-registered automatically, just like you're automatically registered to vote now, if you get your driver's license, but the only thing holding you back is your age. If that could pre-register you and then pop you onto the qualified voter file at the appropriate time, that would be, I think, a real big help.
Yeah. So under this legislation, that would occur, and the clerks would be required to notify the students upon their 18th birthday. So if you have a case, what I like about that is if you have a case where a kid is in this AP class junior year, decides, oh sure, I'll pre-register. That seems important. But kids are kids. 2 years go by, he forgets. He'll get a reminder by being added to the system, and he'll get a reminder that he's registered. And so other states that have done this, it shows that voter turnout among young people increases significantly. So it's a common sense policy, and it also should. What I like about it is it should. I think a lot of schools will be. We know the League of Women Voters does a lot of great work with schools, for instance. Other organizations do too, but if this passes, it's a really natural way to kind of integrate the voter registration with existing civic engagement. I think there's going to be a lot more focus on recruiting young people for poll worker opportunities. One thing a lot of people don't know in Michigan, you can be a poll worker at 16, 17, 18. I didn't know that when I was 16 or 17. So it's just a win-win. I think it encourages more engagement between the schools and the students and community partners around elections. And I really can't imagine who thinks that's a bad idea. But with that,
I can imagine who thinks it's a bad idea, but
yeah. But I thank everyone for their time. And Randy, I'll turn it over to you, and I'm happy to stick around for as long as you need me.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Ben. You gave a presentation plus, because there's so much going on in the legislature. And I was pretty excited about this bill, but then I was seeing all those other, it seems like the legislature has been accomplishing a great deal over the last 6 to 8 months. And now, with all of those bills, great bills lined up, then there's sort of competition for getting some good bills passed. So I guess I'm going to start simply to say thank you for your presentation. I could probably ask 2 or 3 other questions as well, but we're at the end of that time. In either case, thank you, Ben, and we'll be staying in touch. I will just say to Gray Panthers that I've already done an action alert on the Michigan Voting Rights Act that I sent out to my statewide group, and so I can just and it has those 2 asks in there, contacting Winnie Brinks to see if she can expedite this bill, and also contacting Jeremy Moss to move some of this Michigan voting rights bill forward. So I'll just make my pledge is to follow up with Gray Panthers to make sure our 200 plus people will know that there's still a chance for them to have an impact. And I did want to also say, Ben, that a part of our thank you to you, and it's part of our thank you to you is that you will become an honorary member of Gray Panthers of Metro Detroit without even having to pay dues. So there you go, Ben.
Well, I am honored. I appreciate that. And Randy, if I can just say real quickly, because I do think it's natural whenever you're asked to contact X legislator about X bill, it's natural to wonder, okay, like, does this make a difference? And I say this as a naturally cynical person. I can report that these emails are making a difference. I spoke with the chief lobbyist pushing some of these bills last night, and they said they're making all the difference. The emails and phone calls, positive encouragement. So, I think this is just a time in the legislative session where there's a lot to get done, and things might get put on the back burner or might seem to be put on the back burner, but it's really not out of any nefarious reason right now. It's just they're trying to prioritize what they think they need to prioritize. So the more that we can kind of put that positive encouragement out there, the better. And it's definitely made a huge difference with those bills I just mentioned at the end.
So Ben, also your PowerPoint is extremely detailed and informative. So I'm thinking that we should share with you that Danny, you've been recording this, Danny, is that correct? So that we will be able to make a recording of your presentation available to our members. So we may have 10 people here, but we've got 290 people that weren't here that can still hear what you said. So that's another way that we can try to expand your reach. So I'd like to just at this point say again another thank you, and then kind of like ask people on this call. Looks like we got Dave coming back in here too. Is that for us to give a little thank you to Ben, either by raising your hand or by doing the old-fashioned stuff like this, to say thanks, Ben, for keep bringing us up to date on how we're going to try to protect democracy, one group or one person at a time, but part of a whole collective effort for justice. So that's my word of thanks and our word of thanks, Ben.
Well, thank you all. I really appreciate it. And I put in the chat, Randy, but I can send you the PowerPoint too. So feel free to share that out if you'd like.
Okay. Yeah,
I'll make sure the access settings are updated. So.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Ben. Now you, as a member, I want you to know that you are welcome to stay. We have another hour left of our meeting where we actually have reports on other policy issues, including updates on the war and peace in Gaza, updates on what's going on with Michigan labor, updates on the environment, updates on water justice and reproductive health, where we had a speaker last month talk about the Reproductive Health Act. So we're doing a lot of updates in this group, and you're more than welcome to stay on if you have that time.
I do appreciate the invite, but I am on dog watch duty as of 11:30, so I do need to go tend to the critters, unfortunately.
Okay. All right. Well, we're going to say thank you.
Thank you so much, Randy.
You're welcome. So thank you all for being on this call, and I'm grateful that I was able to find how to plug in a simple plug-in and solve my problem where I wasn't hearing. So it was like this was like the closest thing to heaven I've had for a couple of months anyway, is that I can hear you all, and so that was felt pretty good. I sent those of you who are on the board, you will have an agenda coming up, but I'll give a very quick agenda update on our National Council of Gray Panther Networks. And what we're doing, we're having a meeting on Monday in which we'll be having a conversation about the war in Gaza and Israel. We'll be having discussion about the National Voting Rights Act that we were kind of discussing today, even though we know it would be it's definitely uphill that way. We'll be giving a report on climate change. A lot of young people are taking leadership to push for declaring a climate emergency. So those are a number of issues that we'll be talking about on Monday, and that's me just letting you know what we're up to. Any questions on that? And I'm looking forward to hearing what Rich has to say, because I mean, war and peace in Gaza is a pretty darn hot issue right now, and I don't mean to say that you don't have a lot of other things, Rich, but let's hear your report.
Thank you, Randy. I want to begin and end with what you can do, and what you can do is to call your representative in Congress and ask them to co-sponsor Ceasefire Now House Resolution 786 to get an immediate ceasefire and entry of humanitarian aid into Gaza. So we need our representatives to co-sponsor House Resolution 786 to get a ceasefire. Now, let me just give you my personal perspective on what's happening. Netanyahu's strategy of blockading Hamas and permitting settlement expansion and policing the West Bank hasn't worked. Likewise, Israel's democracy has not been working, as Netanyahu has had a power grab, and that has been creating huge protests. However, now Israel seems to be pretty united in attacking Hamas, or more than that, in attacking Gaza. A couple of words about Gaza. Professor Juan Cole at the University of Michigan says that Hamas is a violent vigilante group. And there are at least 4 ways in which Hamas has broken Islamic law. The killing of non-combatants is forbidden. The wanton destruction of towns is forbidden. The commanders must warn the enemy about an attack, which was not done. And of course, taking of hostages is forbidden. So I think that's a good perspective on what Hamas has been up to. Now, how has the rest of the world responded? Well, I'll start with the religious angle. The patriarchs and heads of the church is in Jerusalem have been calling for a ceasefire. 60% of American evangelicals think we are living in the end times, and so this fortifies their support of Israel. Little do they know that 1% of the people living in Gaza are fellow Christians. The United Methodist Church, among others, has been calling for a ceasefire. Jewish Voice for Peace has been calling for a ceasefire and de-escalation. When you look at the various groups, there's been a group of 60 organizations. Jewish Voice for Peace, National Council of Churches, Peace Action, United Methodist Church, United Church of Christ, Churches for Middle East Peace, the Episcopal Church, Friends Committee on National Legislation. Some of the 60 organizations have said, one, our representatives should publicly call for a ceasefire to prevent further loss of life. 2, they should prioritize the release of all hostages and secure the entrance of humanitarian aid into Gaza, and also with humanitarian perspective, provide safe zones for fleeing Palestinians and urge all parties to respect international humanitarian law. So in general, that's what people that I've been following have been asking for. And number 1 is to call for a ceasefire. One more perspective, and that is in a recent poll, 66% of all likely voters say the U.S. should call for a ceasefire and de-escalation of violence in Gaza. The U.S. should use its leverage diplomatically with Israel to prevent further violence and civilian deaths. So that brings me back to where we started. What needs to happen is you need to call or write your representative, ask them to co-sponsor ceasefire now. And now is all capital letters. Now, ceasefire, capital N, capital O, capital W. House Resolution 786 to get an immediate ceasefire and humanitarian aid into Gaza. I just heard this morning that the first 20 trucks have been allowed into Gaza from Egypt. That's good. That's the beginning. There are some 100 trucks ready to go in, so it needs much more. The sad part is that a lot of those first 20 trucks were loaded with items for funerals. So the real aid to help those who are trying to survive is still to be delivered. So one more time, House Resolution 786. You can call 202-224-3121 and ask for your representative Monday through Friday. So that's my report. Be glad to hear your comments, questions.
Okay, do people have questions for Rich? This is a pretty powerful social justice event that's happening right now. No, there was a resolution that Rashida Tlaib was co-sponsoring. Is that the same one that you're talking about? The one I found didn't have a bill number, though.
Yes, this is the same one. This is the resolution originated by Rashida Tlaib and Cori Bush, 786.
Yeah. I kept looking for that number, and so you provided that for me. So I've been kind of focused on this issue. So
Good.
And we'll be having this kind of debate. It's a very tough position if you, let's say you were a traditional Jewish person, with saying that attacks on Israel become like it's like attacking your mother or your father. There's people that look at it that way beyond. And how would you, what conversation would you have to people who are saying, well, this was a terrorist group. You can't fight terror by just sitting down and not fighting back. What would your argumentation be on that, Rich?
Well, I think we need to recognize that we are all individuals with individual circumstances, past, present, and future. And so our circumstances certainly color our perspective, and we need to understand that. And what we also need to understand is the atrocities that have happened to Jewish people have also been happening to Palestinian Muslims and Palestinian Christians. What has happened, in a sense, we're all suffering, and we need to get a way out of this mutual suffering. And what's in the policies of Israel and the policies of the United States have not relieved the suffering, but the way out now is at first to get a ceasefire.
Any other questions for Rich? I'm just going to say that call, supporting that resolution, was my recommendation to our National Council of Gray Panther Networks on Monday. But we've got, there's different folks on Gray Panthers that will have different points of view on that. Dave, is that your hand up or is that an applause?
No, that's hands up.
Okay.
My question is, I read where Hamas, one of the secondary, if not in some of their views, the primary reason was to disrupt the possible treaties between Saudi Arabia and the Israelis. There's been a number of treaties in the last about 5 or 6 years between Israel and their neighbors, and Hamas was really afraid that Palestinians are going to get forgotten about. And I understand that. I don't understand the way they did it, but I can understand where people are saying, gee, with all these treaties haven't come in place and recognizing the state of Israel, which I want to recognize, don't get me wrong. There seems to be the Palestinians, we're forgetting about the prior two-state solution that was supposed to be there.
Well, I think that the two-state solution is probably history because of the expansion of the hundreds of thousands of people in the settlements. So we're going to have more apartheid, or we're going to have a one-state solution, or we're going to have just keep on warring. The future is very bleak along that way, and we don't have a peace broker that is respected by all sides. The U.S. has shot itself in the foot in terms of being a recognized peace broker across the Middle East. All I can say is everybody's got their reasons for violence, and we have to work to get out of the give and take.
I see Nick.
Rich, a ceasefire only works if both sides comply. It's broken the minute one side or the other doesn't. U.S. probably would have some influence, obviously, with Israel. It wouldn't with Hamas. The UN doesn't seem to have any strength anywhere around the ways. How do you get Hamas to comply with the ceasefire?
Well, I think that's where countries like Jordan, need to step up. So that there are Hamas does have relationships with other organizations and nations, and that's up to them. It's a full court press from all sides. The other thing I'd say is in war and peace, there are always spaces for independent initiatives. Just 60 years ago, President Kennedy took independent initiatives with Russia to get a ban on some testing of nuclear weapons. So we need to remind ourselves that historically, people like Kennedy and Gorbachev have taken independent initiatives, and we're open to that.
One other quick question, and I know that we have a lot more things on our agenda, but this just seems to be pretty hot right now. Is there a space for the rest of Palestine? Because Gaza is only one part of where the Palestinian people live. There's a section that used to be called the Palestine Liberation Organization with Mahmoud Abbas, if I'm getting my names correct. What role would Mahmoud Abbas play if he's also supposed to be representing Palestinians in that what do they call the West Bank?
Yes.
So is there a role to not just negotiate with one group of Palestinians, but to also negotiate with both of them?
Well, in terms of the West Bank, the answer is yes. In terms of Gaza, the answer is the West Bank officials of Palestine don't have any influence with Hamas. On the other hand, the majority of Palestinians in Gaza are not happy with Hamas. But we're always looking for leaders who have followers who have a peace agenda, and we have a shortage of those across the Middle East. Very sad commentary.
Okay. Any further questions for Rich?
Well, thank you
I
for
always
your
have
good.
more, but I really want to stop here because of our time. Sure. We could have probably a couple days worth of conversations there, Rich. I can maybe get back to you with another one or two of my questions, but thank you so much, Rich, because this is a pretty important, very important topic right now.
Well, thanks for the time, and I appreciate the attention and the good questions. Good stuff. Take care, you all.
All right. Thank you, Rich. Now, speaking of conflict, we happen to have a person named Dave Ivers in the room who's been with the labor movement for quite a few years. And so Dave agreed to kind of give us, there's so much going on besides the UAW strike that may be important to us from the standpoint of having relations with labor. So Dave, you want to give us an update on what's happening with the Michigan labor actions?
Oh, thank you very much. My years of being really involved, I was on the Michigan State Executive Board, Michigan State AFL-CIO Executive Board, and the Metro Detroit Executive Board, plus my leadership in the operating engineers. but now I'm nothing, nowhere. But the reality is that the three big, I say three, there's other smaller ones, but when you look at the UAW, the UAW and the strike with the three, Stellantis, GM, and Ford, and then you look at the UAW at the Blue Cross Blue Shield, and then you look at the casinos, which you have 6 unions. You've got you've got Unite Here, which is the primary union, and then you've got operating engineers and Teamsters, and a couple others, carpenters, a couple other unions. All 3 of those strikes are trying to get back where they were years ago. And I think that's an important thing to remember. As we all know, and I think we've read about, UAW gave up considerable when the 2 of the big 3, or our Detroit big 3, when 2 of the big 3 went bankrupt, and the concessions were substantial to keep them going. And it was partly required by the United States House of Representatives or Senate to say we want to see some real concessions. And of course, it was our friends on the other side of the aisle that are responsible for that. What they're trying to do is get back to where they were. And then the UAW at Blue Cross Blue Shield had exactly the same situation. The average worker is making less than here at Blue Cross Blue Shield is making less than he or she did 5, 6, 7 years ago. I mean, per hour, not just in real time, but actually per hour. The casino operators, because of pandemic, their last contract was at the midst of pandemic, and the concessions were not dramatic as the other 2, but they were substantial, and they want to get back where they are. And it's unfortunate we live in a world where the CEOs keep getting more and more money and the workers get less. And it's something that, quite frankly, I've got to editorialize a little bit. You know, in 1970, the average American family could have a good living with 1 person working. And then things changed. And it changed not for the better. In 1970, the average CEO made about 20 to 30 times more than the average worker. I think 2020 is the last time they've done an official one, but today it's like 300 to 400 times what the average worker makes. So unlike Europe, where CEOs are making 20 to 30 times than the average worker, in the United States it's 300 to 400 times, and we are totally acceptable with that. Nobody's getting alarmed. I mean, I recognize my brothers and sisters that are on the screen today all feel the same, I'm sure. But the reality is the UAW strike, I can tell you from my experience that the one of the single biggest thing, if I were in the UAW negotiating to get rid of the tiers, that'd be the number 1 thing. I went through that in 2002, 2003, when the economy got really bad. And many employers try to get us to go to a 2-tier system. And I have to be honest with what negotiating is. My stewards that are working in the plant, in my case, wasn't plant, it was powerhouses and places like that. And even bus drivers didn't really mind too much if they got what in today's would be a 50-cent raise, but they reduced the pay of the new starts by $1 an hour. They would have voted yes on it. But I'm proud to say that I was number 2, our number 1, Phil Sloop, and myself said absolutely not. We're not going to go to a 2-tier system. And I made a couple enemies, I guess it was a good word for it, for insisting on no 2-tier. We went for I think it was 2 years without a pay raise, rather than go to a 2-tier system. But I'm really proud of my brothers and sisters for supporting that narrowly, but they supported it. So the mistake of the 2-tier or the multi-tier system in the UAW isn't the fault of just the leadership. I can't imagine the top leadership of the UAW wanting to get themselves into a position where as soon as 51% of the people are not at the top tier, it'll be the last time the top tier ever gets a pay raise. If there's democracy in the union, if there's democracy. So we're in a problem right now, and I'm ranting too much, but we're in a problem right now where people are trying to play catch up. My brothers and sisters at UAW, my brothers and sisters at Unite here, at Teamsters, they're trying to play catch up for what they've given up in the past, and it's something that we all have to stick with them. And I was at a couple of rallies. I've been at the one initially right when the strike first started, down at the opening of the auto show, which was really interesting. Here we are rallying, and there's men and women going by in evening gowns and tuxedos and that, and we were there planning unite, we'll unite. And then more recently at Blue Cross Blue Shield building on Beaubien and Jefferson, I've been to picket lines there a couple of times. But the reality for me, and I have to say, my very first job as an 18-year-old was at Blue Cross Blue Shield. And in 1960, Blue Cross Blue Shield were separate entities. They had separate employees. They had only one entrance. I mean, it was one building, but they were separate employees. And I was an employee of Blue Cross Blue Shield. And I have to say, in a year and a half before I went into service, a year before I went into service, I got promoted 4 times. And the women that I worked with in the mailroom never got promoted. And some of them had working there 10 years. But because I was a guy and wore a tie, couldn't wear a sport coat. No, couldn't do that. But I got promoted and they didn't. And it was when I first became awareness of the discrimination against women in the workplace. But I'm done with my reports. Sorry to bore you.
No, Dave, don't say boring. You're reporting on some very important things that are in the headlines today that affect people's lives and livelihoods. Do any of you have some questions for Dave on the strikes that are going on right now? Or any comments?
Dave, this is Kathleen. I put something in the chat, but what I'm wondering about is, in your opinion, what do you think is the greatest sticking point to our getting to yes here in our country, in Michigan, but more important in our country, as it relates to what the unions want and what the auto companies are ready to give?
I have to believe that the UAW negotiating team, I don't know if it is in a Blue Cross Blue Shield part, but in the UAW, but with the big three, the negotiating team is more like the majority of us. They're more people oriented, more looking for the workers more. They're going to have a tough time, and I would, if I've already given my 2 cents worth, but if I had my say, the number one thing to come out with was getting rid of the 2-tier system, the divisiveness within that plant. I volunteered for United Way. I haven't in the last few years. I quit probably around the same time as the pandemic started. But I remember going into a plant in a big GM plant in Pontiac, where they had 9 different pay rates in the same plant. But at that same time, there were like 5 different employers, because they had parts doing this and UAW doing this and GM doing this. To me, the one thing is to, I guess if you talk about a national thing, it'd be stop the misinformation, stop the how do we get people to listen to the facts? I passed a car the other day that had a big bumper sticker of Biden, and he was being, I hate to say this, but he was being peed on by Trump, and that's a significant number of Americans today. We seem to be haters today, and I think we all got to start to get a little love in our system. And I don't know, I don't have no answer, but I think we've got to start loving each other a little more.
Okay, that was That was a basic question there, Kathleen. So thanks for asking, and thanks, Dave, for kind of trying to share your views on that. But we're all affected in the big picture by when organized labor moves wages ahead, then that affects the rest of us. You know, so it's kind of like you're not just negotiating for UAW folks, but you're kind of making the case for people who are having to earn a living by getting paid so much per hour or whatever for a salary. So thanks again, Dave. We have had in the past people from the Sierra Club to give an update on environmental justice, and the people were not available to do that, but they did offer. There's a person named Andrew Sarpolis. I don't know if any of you know Andrew or not, but he's the Michigan field manager for the Sierra Club. And the other person who's come here is named Fred Miller, who's with the Sierra Club. Neither one of them were available, but Andrew did agree to put some things in writing that I can at least share with you today, even if it's not coming out of the mouths of somebody who's much more astute about the environment than myself. But one of the things that Andrew was saying is that they just had 8 days ago, the Michigan Senate released a new version of what they call the clean energy bills. And they didn't give me bill numbers, but they said that these bills have undergone some big revisions, and they've had to fight off a number of attacks to roll back the provisions inside. But Michigan Democrats took a couple $1 million from the DT Energy, and politicians are under immense pressure to water down some of these bills that have to do with clean energy. Now, I'm sorry, he didn't give me the numbers for these bills, but he's again saying kind of what we were hearing from our speaker is that there's only so many days left, so they're going to need some phone calls made to support these clean energy bills. If you want more information, he said you can call him directly, Andrew Sarpolis. So I'm going to give you his phone number if you're interested in the environment, and we can maybe do a little follow-up work, because this was kind of like me catching as catch can here. But Andrew's phone number is 248-924-4857, 248-924-4857. So these are some bills. Again, they had a number of champions for these bills, so it's not all doom and gloom, but it's kind of tough with a very close majority of the Democrats to be able to get this clean energy bills passed in the Michigan legislature. So we're going to try to get a little more information so we can share with our Gray Panther network about those bills. All right. That's what I'm given as a reading the messages from our friends at the Sierra Club. I did say that the Environmental Protection Agency at the national level, the Biden administration is issuing some administrative rules. So you don't have to get permission from Congress. Congress is all tied up in knots, and certainly in the House, they can't figure out who their leader is, let alone to pass a budget or bills like this. But what the president has, let's say you were the president, let's say President Danny Foster or President Kathleen McNellis or President Dave Ivers or President Nick Shimatero. Now that's a good candidate for President Nick. That you all could at least make some kind of declarations. You could kind of create some administrative rules without having to get them approved by Congress. They can be pushed back. But these rules would then include some things creating a plan to cut climate pollution. And it's kind of like right now, we're taking a lot of people in the environmental movements are taking their cues from people who are more like Danny's age or younger, because they're saying the environment's, we're having high levels of heat on a daily basis. We're having fires, we're having floods. This is not just some accident. This has something to do with climate change that's happening to all of us. So in either case, some of these declarations, like for example, having a methane standard, having a climate risk disclosure, and having some kind of rules for light duty vehicles and rules for heavy duty vehicles. Because when we drive around with gasoline engines, we're creating that pollution too. So these are some things to look out for. I'm going to try to get a little more information on it, but that's the report from the Sierra Club, that there's things going on in the environment, and wanted to share those with you. Any comments or questions? Okay. A couple other items on the agenda, one having to do with water justice, and Paul Von Oyen is not here to give that report, but Paul and I have kind of worked together on water justice things. As a matter of fact, I don't know if you saw this or not, but my mugshot was in the Free Press here about a couple of weeks ago. It was part of it. Stephanie Chang, State Senator Stephanie Chang, who is an advocate for quite a few of the things that we're fighting for. She has been a leader in terms of getting bills out for water justice. And so I've been working on water justice for at least 8 years now with a group called the People's Water Board. And I still cannot imagine, they sometimes will have people try this if you really have nothing else better to do, but try considering living one day without using water. Think about it. Would you get up in the morning and take a shower? No, if you don't have water, if your water's cut off. No, you wouldn't be able to wash your hands. No, you wouldn't be able to flush your toilets. No, you wouldn't be able to give a baby or a grandchild a bath. I mean, these are all, water is life. The water is so essential. So they have now, for the first, after fighting as a grassroots group for this 8 or 9 years, the People's Water Board is working with the City of Detroit, which came up with a Lifeline program to make water affordable for people in Detroit. But these bills would expand water affordability on the statewide basis, because there's people out there in the western part of the state and northern part of the state. So these bills would include, there's about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 bills that were part of a package that were introduced, and they were introduced at a press conference. So I was one in the second row. I think half of my head showed up in a picture that got in the Free Press. So if you really look carefully, you'd see the top of my head. But that was kind of like an important point, that things are moving forward, and it doesn't mean that if you don't get it this time that you couldn't possibly get some things next time. But the summary of the bills is one is that there's going to be an affordability program where people would not have to pay water bills that would not exceed 3% of their household income. And that they could also get, and this is like the Lifeline program in Detroit, where if you have back bills, you could have those back bills paid. Now there's a fund, there's 2 different funds that are created, 3 different funds that are created by this legislation, along with having $2 on everybody's water bill or utility bill to go to a fund. There's also a $30 million fund that came down from the governor's office, and another 70 million. So there's money there that could help. So utilities are excited about getting paid. Lo and behold, we've got a win-win situation here with water justice, but it is a matter of getting things through the legislature. They have, so I mentioned the affordability fund. They have shut-off protections, so that would protect households, clear guidelines that would say they need to have notification and so forth. There's some things that protect tenants. But say if you're a tenant and your landlord was the one that wasn't paying the bills, you're still going to get stuck with the crisis of not having water if your landlord was being irresponsible. So this would allow if you're a tenant, you'd say you're a person on a minimum wage, when you wanted to pay your water bill, but it's the landlord who was screwing up. This bill would allow you to take over and pay the water bill. Can you believe that the people would want to be able to pay the water bills as opposed to just being shut off? Decriminalizing water connections. There are people that figured out how to turn the water back on. I go outside the house and there's a little, if you're a smart enough person, you could figure out how to turn the water back on, but that's been made into a major criminal thing. You could have serious problems. This would decriminalize that act. And then again, it would be one basic bill is just creating the Human Right to Water Act. It's sort of like the basic thing, like I was talking about at the beginning, that people really should have a human right to water. That's something United Nations said, that water is a human right. So I'm giving you all the blow by blow, but they have these bills in both the Senate and the House. And next Tuesday and next Thursday, I'll be sitting in with some meeting with the state legislators to discuss with them. Just like Ben was saying, that sometimes having conversations with legislators may open up their eyes or give them some extra motivation that these are important. And they have support from not only consumers that want to get their water, but also from the utility companies that want to get paid. And so it's trying to create a solution. So that's an update on the water bills that we're kind of trying to move full steam ahead. And this is kind of an important part of time, but no guarantees, but they're giving it their best shot to try to move ahead with getting water being a human right and water being affordable. So that's probably more than you wanted to know, but that's my report on what's happening with water justice. And I'll tell you one thing, it's a big deal. It may not be a big deal to us who are in the suburbs because we just take water for granted. We turn on the tap and it's right there for us. And most of us can afford to pay the bills. But if you were in a very low income situation, it would be a whole ballpark. So we're talking about has a disproportionate impact on people of color and people who are low income. So it's justice from that standpoint. Any questions or comments on that? I guess I've done such a wonderful job that you know that we're doing something. Paul Von Oyen and I are, who's actually spending time with his grandchildren. I have to give him that. Paul couldn't be here because of that reason. And we did have another person who would normally be here who's taking care of his sister who's around in her 80s and having to be put into a nursing home. So that's another person on our board that, let's see. So there's some reasons why we're not all here. But that was my report on water justice. And let's see. Now, our big speaker last month was Lori Pohutsky. Remember that name?
Yeah.
Our speaker. And there's a whole legislative saga that's gone on because I've been sending out action alerts about this, but some of you may have heard anyway that in the House, there's there was 11 bills for water, for supporting the Reproductive Health Act, or the RHA. And those bills were reported out of the Health Policy Committee in the House, but there was one legislator, and in the House, all it takes is one legislator to kill a bill. And there was this person there called Representative Karen Whitsitt. Have anybody heard of her name? Well, Karen is an African-American woman from Detroit and also the Grosse Points, so the northern suburbs as well as Detroit. And she's herself is a person who had an abortion, and you'd think that she, of all people, would want to make sure that abortions would be affordable to other people. One of the sticking points was that one of the bills said that Medicaid, Michigan pays money for Medicaid, that some of that Medicaid then could cover abortions for the first time. And that was something, that just she had opposition to, and maybe she just opposes abortion on a principle. Maybe there's other things going on, but right now, Karen Whitsitt has done a major effort to block the bill in the House. Now they didn't give up on this. They sent these about 4 or 5 bills that they sent over to the Senate, and I just got information from a group called Gunwers. I don't know if I think Nick knows about Gunwers, but that's a state legislative information group. If you pay good money, you can get their bill. But I in communication with a lobbyist who gives me updates on this, but they did note here, just as of, let's see, the 19th was just here 2 days ago, that the Senate did pass the Reproductive Health Act package. And that meant that, there was progress in one house, but not in the other. And so it's kind of like it's still deadlocked. Now there's still things that are going on. Maybe they can negotiate with Karen Whitsitt, but sometimes it's just not easy to make progress. And in the legislature, you thought that, well, we had this special opportunity where the Dems were in charge so they could get things through, and they've done of that. But then there's places like this where one person can kill a bill, and that's what seems to have happened so far.
Just so you know, Randy, Representative Whitsitt is pro-choice. She opposes Medicaid funding, I suspect because of the voters having voted on that issue several years back. And she had some concerns with provisions dealing with late-term abortions, which are problematic to a lot of people. This topic has been controversial for years. It's only become partisan in the last decade or so. It was bipartisan on both sides for many, many years, certainly the years I was in the legislature. I believe that there needs to be a much more serious discussion on wins and ifs, as opposed to always yes or always no. But I understand Whitsitt's objections, particularly to Medicaid funding, which would likely go to the ballot and fail again. And late-term abortions is a very complicated issue in terms of, at least in terms of post-viability abortions, where it's much more controversial. I have my own position on the issue, which is different than most of you, but I do think that it's time to have a civilized discussion on the whole issue instead of choosing up sides, which is what has been traditionally the approach.
Well, this was a bill that was introduced. Yes, Dave.
Well, I guess I got a question for Kathleen. My understanding that I don't know if there's a hospital in Michigan that does late-term abortions. I thought there was only a few hospitals in the country that did late-term abortions.
I've been away from practice now for about 6-7 years, and I did do complex OB during the course of my tenure at the hospitals and stuff, particularly at places that were, of course, secular. So that we did do interruptions of pregnancy, we did do the abortions, we did do late-term abortions. I can tell you that all that had been done in the past. My sense on this is that there had been so much pushback that we can't find providers to do things like that at this juncture. And I want to also add that as it related to late-term abortions, they were not things that were done without a lot. There were major complications. Either you had a kid that was already coming in very ill, 10, 11, 12 years of age, having been a victim of incest, having been impregnated, of course, never having received any kind of prenatal care. It was things like that. It was major anomalies. It was already membranes were ruptured. This was going to get delivered one way or another. And as an anesthetist, I know what I did. I know that none of these things are taken lightly. You need to know that late-term abortions were treated just like doing complicated cesarean sections. There is nothing easy peasy about any of those, so that no one ever took that stuff lightly, much less doing it in any kind of a clinic. I do not know, though, legislatively, if I know that we had bills batted around about anything beyond about 22 weeks. So that's my experience, and that's what I would know. Nick, you were in the legislature, so you do maybe have a little more insight on that.
The constitutional, actually, what the legislature was when I was there versus what it is today is dramatically different, particularly on this issue. But the reality is that the constitutional amendment that was adopted takes away from government the ability to deal with the issue. It's a fundamental right under the state constitution, so the state legislature really can't do much of anything. I've been arguing for some time that, and I'm getting some progress on, unfortunately, on the Republican side, but not on the Democratic side, that we need to look to other issues besides criminality at this point. Ethics should be something that the medical profession should care about, obviously, in licensure, but really what we ought to be working on are things like what puts a woman, whether it's early or late term, what puts a woman in a position of feeling that she needs to have an abortion. There are health reasons, and those are legitimate issues, mental health reasons, physical health reasons, although that's undefined and under the constitutional amendment can't be defined really, and that's part of the problem with the amendment as it was worded. But there are economic reasons that we can and should address, making sure that prenatal and prenatal, neonatal, and postnatal care are affordable and accessible, that child care is affordable, accessible, that pregnant women aren't discriminated against in the workplace, and we've made some progress on that, and that women with children are not discriminated against in the workplace. You know, generally speaking, if a man has a family, that's considered a plus. If a woman has a family, that's considered a negative by many employers. And that needs to be addressed. And I think those are much more important issues on the overall aspect of it than funding abortions or late-term abortions. You're right, they've always been rare. And I have no doubt that that they're taken seriously by a lot of people. Unfortunately, there are some people who don't, and I always say you don't make laws for the good people. You make laws for the bad people who don't take it seriously or who do look at it as just a financial issue. So I'm just saying that I think there are two things that should be going on now. There should be an attempt between the pro-choice and pro-life folks on the issues I just discussed, the economic and health issues, and getting a better handle on that, and then having more of a discussion of what we're really talking about. I come from a different place than the rest of this group, and I acknowledge it. My position has always been that we shouldn't discriminate against people, against human life, whether they're born or not born, that women certainly are entitled to the full plethora of civil rights, but that fetal life is also entitled to certain rights, and that the problem is balancing them when they conflict. They don't always conflict. Most of the times they don't conflict, but there are occasions when the rights of a woman and the rights of the child conflict, and that's the role of government, is to try to, you'll excuse the expression, referee, and that giving rights to one group is that rights are not a zero-sum game. And we viewed it that way, that you either give women rights or you give children, or you give unborn children rights. You can't do both, because you have to take away from one or the other. I think that's a false statement, that both can have rights and that the government then has to referee where those rights conflict, just as giving Black people rights doesn't take rights away from white people. Giving unborn children rights doesn't take rights away from women. I know this is a very, I think the problem, my fundamental concern at this point in our history, is that all of us try to treat this issue as having simple answers. It's a complex question, and there aren't simple answers to complex problems.
Yeah, well, we could probably debate for hours, Nick, but I'm kind of reporting on that other perspective that I will just say, from what I've heard, that there may still be possibilities of having this legislation get through, and that they might be considering, because all these bills are tie barred. And there are some things in there that say pro-choice and pro-life people will agree on.
Yeah.
So there may be, some basic kinds of things, like, for example, if let's say you lived in Petoskey or the Upper Peninsula, you might have to drive 10 or 12 hours just to get to a clinic. And that doesn't make any sense. It's no access to having abortion or child care, for that reproductive care. So that's one example of a bill that's in that package of 11 that could be. And so there's some kind of discussion about maybe if they consider taking away the tie bars so that at least some of the bills could get adopted, as opposed to saying all of them. Now, that's just a thought, because I know one of my groups, called Michigan Voices, is opposed to that. But I'm just saying that it isn't over until it's over with this, is what I'm saying. So there's still, women should have rights, and that's my bottom line kind of thing. And that there should be equal access to, not just for rich people, but poor people should have equal access to health care. So that's my 2 cents worth there. Well, thank you, Nick. You're always offering another thoughtful alternative. So here we are having all these thoughtful discussions here at Gray Panthers. And yes, Dave.
I'm wearing my healthcare for all button right now as we speak, but that is one of the fundamental issues in this country. Capitalism, profit for hospitals, profit. The hospitals get insurance, and the big profiters is their insurance companies. It does the hospital, the doctors are getting squeezed, the nurses, the staff are getting squeezed. It's the insurance companies that are making all the money. We would have more adequate health care, whether it be for a pro-choice person or a person in their 80s, if we had true health care for all. If we did away with the profit in healthcare, that's what we need to do.
All right, thank you. For the issue of healthcare has always been high on the Gray Panthers agenda since I've been involved with it. Well, we're kind of reached noon here, and the good news, I guess, at least I think of it as good news, is that there's 5 of us here who are board members, and if we had, that gives us there's 10 board members, so 5 gives us enough people to be able to say that we have a quorum, right? So if you can at least take a 5-minute break, can we? Is there somebody here that just must get off this call, or can you stay with us for another hour for our board meeting?
I'm not sure I can be here for a full hour because it's Sweetest Day and my wife is out and coming back, and we don't
Okay.
have reservations.
Well,
for
you know, we have a little.
As long as-
but I can stay for a while.
As long as you're here so we can call quorum, Nick, then that's all, it's cool. After that, we're okay. We just need to make quorum and then we can
Oh,
continue whether you're able to continue with us or not. Yeah, we've got the bylaws to show it.
There we go. You can hug your wife on behalf of the rest of us.
I told her we'd go out to brunch, so because we don't have reservations for dinner and we don't think it's gonna be a good idea.
So do you guys want to just look at that then, start our board meeting, and then, you know, we'll kind of, or do we have to take a very quick body break, or can we just move ahead with our board meeting?
I think
As far as I'm concerned.
That way we'll have our quorum with Nick here, right?
Yeah.
Okay.